Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. As it has been all week, Libya remains centre of attention. And for the watching world, there are some very pressing questions. Anjan has just emailed from Bangladesh to say, I hope the most powerful countries in the world uproot Colonel Gaddafi. He's a threat to his people and to the whole world. So military action is being suggested by some of you. Others are looking to diplomacy or to sanctions. Some say let's not do anything at all. So what about you? Wherever you're watching, what do you think should be done about the situation in Libya? You're welcome to get involved. Just looking through some of the messages you're sending in. Mangangeni in Johannesburg's email, this is the one case where a military intervention by the UN is justified, not to bring democracy to that country, but to save the lives of Libyans. Unfortunately, those countries most likely to do so destroyed their credibility in Iraq. Well, we'll get into these issues and many others in a moment. But before we discuss Libya, let's get the latest on what's happening there, beginning in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, where there's reported to be fighting on either side of the city. This appears to be concentrated in the towns of Al-Zawiya to the west and Misrata to the east. Tripoli itself is being defended by Colonel Gaddafi's top military unit. The Reuters news agency is reporting that the eastern town of Brega is now under rebel control. Meanwhile, at an emergency session in Geneva, the UN's Human Rights Commissioner has said that the violence in Libya appears to be escalating and has urged the world to act without delay. Navi Pillay said the actions reportedly taken by Colonel Gaddafi could amount to crimes against humanity. And we'll talk about what that action might be in a moment here on World Have Your Say. Now, at least 5 people have been killed in anti-government protests in Iraq as thousands of people took to the streets in demonstrations against corruption and the poor state of the economy. The biggest demonstration was in Baghdad's main square. Elsewhere, in Yemen, tens of thousands of supporters and opponents of the president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, have held demonstrations in the capital, Sana'a. The past 9 days have seen 19 people die in a sustained wave of nationwide anti-government protests. The president has said he'll definitely stand down at the end of his term in 2013, but he said he won't give way to what he's calling anarchy and killing. And away from the protests in North Africa and the Middle East, John Galliano, the British fashion designer, has been suspended by French couture brand Dior, pending investigation about alleged anti-Semitic remarks he made outside a Paris cafe. Galliano was escorted home by French police after an altercation that ended with him hurling insults at a couple, according to a police source. Well, I'm joined by guests in Washington, D.C., in London and in Manchester. Wherever you're watching BBC World News, your involvement is always welcome. The contact details for Twitter, email, the blog, Facebook, phone, you name it, you can get in touch. It's all scrolling along the bottom of the screen throughout the programme. But let me introduce you to our 3 guests. Professor Juan Mendez is a UN Special Rapporteur on torture. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. We also have Sundes, who's with us from Manchester. She's a daughter of an anti-Gaddafi activist. And first of all, let's speak to Safwan Jammoum, who's in London. He worked in Cultural Affairs, the Cultural Affairs Office at the Libyan Embassy in London until a few days ago when he resigned. Safwan, why did you decide to stop working?
Hi, first of all, I would like to thank every mom who sacrificed her son in Benghazi to free Benghazi, and I would like to thank every mom who sacrificed her son to free Libya from this dictator. I did resign, as I saw even his son, he doesn't have any position in Libya, official position, and he's frightening the people by, I will fight until the last bullet, until the last man. This is not a war. These are civilians. I would like to join these guys, the civilians, at least by my voice, if I can't be there.
And what do you want? We know the UN is meeting, the Human Rights Council of the UN. We know that NATO is meeting today. Obviously, many other organisations are watching keenly, the Arab League, the African Union. What kind of action do you want now?
Actually, they're just discussing. We don't need the discussion, we need decision. First of all, we need put Libya under embargo, under sanction, to keep Gaddafi and his family over there, and all the people who corrupt the country and kill people in Libya. As a Libyan, we are capable to kick Gaddafi out of the country, and it will be soon.
OK, so you're calling for sanctions. I wonder, Juan Mendez, if you think that is appropriate.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I do think it's appropriate given the information that we have on what's happening on the streets in in Libya today, but I think sanctions have an effect over time. I think we need more than sanctions. For example, I think we need for the international community to react in two ways. One, to prevent more bloodshed from happening, and two, make sure that the crimes that have already been committed do not go unpunished. And in that sense, I think the Security Council should take a much more robust position with regards to Libya, and insist on no more bloodshed and a negotiated end to this crisis. And if Colonel Gaddafi is not willing to abide by the international community's insistence, then the international community has a responsibility to take the matter up and make some decisions.
You're talking about negotiating an end to this. I just wonder, Sundes in Manchester, do you think negotiation is a realistic option anymore?
No, not at all. 42 years we've had of this dictator. People for years and years within within Libya, have tried to negotiate. Be it with nobody can negotiate with Gaddafi. They've tried to negotiate with his son Saif. That didn't work. So it's the end of negotiation. It's the end of talking with the Gaddafis. It's time for international cry out for the use of words such as war criminal on Gaddafi, terrorist. He's terrorizing his people. So to negotiate, he is not going to negotiate. I mean, if you saw him, his speech and his telephone call, those are not the words of someone who can negotiate.
Well, let's talk about this idea of negotiation and how realistic it is. Safwan, maybe you want to come in on this, but Professor Mendes and Sundes, do you feel free to pick up on what Safwan's saying? Safwan, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, she's right. There is no negotiation with Gaddafi. Even before, he never negotiated with anyone. Even his son now, he doesn't want to negotiate. As I said, he wants to fight until the last bullet, until the last man. There is no negotiation at all. He blocked everything. He just thinks his country alone.
I didn't mean to imply that a negotiated solution should allow Gaddafi to remain in power, or his children to insist on retaining any kind of power. But I do think that negotiations could deal with, for example, stopping the carnage and the killing on the streets. And I don't mean to say that negotiations, would necessarily result in a defeat of the insurgent movement. I think it's important to reach a resolution with as low a level of bloodshed as possible from now on. That's all I'm saying about negotiation.
Yeah, about the negotiation, but we understand. Did you see his speech? He's accusing United States, United Kingdom, France, even Bin Laden. And he's accusing the people. He's saying they're all in drugs, and they're like rats. He's comparing people with rats.
Yes.
That means he blocked everything. And he wants to fight.
The alternative to negotiations is just a complete military defeat of the regime, and that may be what ultimately has to happen. But in the meantime, it's incumbent on the international community and on everybody to try to reach a resolution that is consistent with democratic values and with human rights, and that means both on the results but also on the process by which we get the result.
Sundes, come in on this discussion.
Right, yes. I think the world needs to cry out for Libya. There needs to be more of the use of the words like war criminal, but there also needs to be the use of the words of the fact that Gaddafi is no longer a leader. He says it himself in his speech, but it's a speech of a crazy man. But the world needs to start using, I mean, Cameron and all the other leaders, world leaders, have to start talking about Libya as though Gaddafi does not exist. Because
that's exactly what I meant by not letting the crimes go unpunished. I think the Security Council should refer the case of Libya to the International Criminal Court and to start an inquiry into individual responsibilities.
Professor
for
Mendes,
firing
let me just interrupt you. Do you honestly think that anyone in Libya at the moment will be paying any attention to the threat from the International Criminal Court in The Hague?
Well, those are the tools that the international community has at its disposal. I mean, if we want those crimes not to go unpunished, we obviously want to punish them via a recognized and legitimate way of dealing with war crimes and crimes against humanity, which is what has been happening in Libya in these last few days. We don't want, you know, retribution to be hanging them from the highest post. That's, okay, if we want justice, we should be willing to do justice the proper way.
Okay, well, you make the case to do justice the proper way, as you say it. Those of you watching on BBC World News, do you think it's appropriate to start those wheels in motion at this point, or should things like working out who's done what and whether they should stand trial, should that wait for a little while? I'm just looking on the BBC News live page, which you can find at bbc.com/news. People like Ali Tweet are saying that thousands of Libyans in Tripoli are joining Gaddafi opponents marching to Green Square. But Libyan state television is saying that many supporters of the colonel, including men, women and young people, are also heading to Green Square to support and take pride in their leader. So two different perspectives. Let's pull up an email here that's come in from Marial in central Libya, who says, "Please, please, please leave Libya alone. We're better off alone. The news broadcast lies and Libya is targeted from outside because of its strategic location and oil production." Safwan, I wonder what you would say to Marial if they're watching now.
Yeah, these protesters in the Green Square, everyone knows. I brought up in Libya. They're taking all the students out of schools, teachers out of their schools as well, from universities, people from their works, everyone to support Gaddafi and give them his pictures and everything. That's everyone knows about it.
But what about the broader point from Marial on email? There are lots of outside interests who want to get their hands on Libya's oil, and that the Libyans should be aware of outside influence.
Yes, we are aware. As Libyan people, we are aware of that, and everyone knows about it. Yeah, we need to protect our wealth as well, from Gaddafi's and other countries as well.
Sundays?
Same.
I totally agree with the brother. I agree. The Libyans are aware of the wealth that Libya holds, but at the same time, the Libyans have never actually had the wealth. It's all gone to Gaddafi and his sons. 135, was it? 135 billion is how much Gaddafi is worth. The Libyans haven't seen any of that. If anything, the international community has seen more of that wealth than we Libyans have. So we are aware, but at the moment, it's the last thing that the Libyans currently in Libya are thinking of. I think they're fighting for their freedom first and fighting for the rights to live before they can even think about oil.
Professor Mendes?
Yeah, well, leaving Libya alone has resulted in indiscriminate fire against civilians, in torture and murder of people who were only exercising their democratic rights to demonstrate peacefully. Actually, I think the international community has to help the Libyan people defend their rights. And I think, back to your original question, I think the moment to start investigations and possible prosecutions before the International Criminal Court is now, among other things because it gives a message to those who may be the instrument of Colonel Gaddafi that they too will see justice, and that may persuade them to defect and to stop firing against their own people. I think that is a preventive effect that international justice can have, and it could be a very powerful tool today, not a year from now, not 2 years from now, but today, in trying to get a good resolution of this conflict.
Sorry, just to correct things, the Libyan army never fire against their own people. That's his militias that's created. He brought these militias from Africa.
I must ask you, just before we take a break here, how can you possibly know whether the Libyan army have fired on the people opposing Colonel Gaddafi? It's impossible for any of us to say these things with certainty.
Oh, yes. I have connection in Benghazi, which this city is whipped out of Gaddafi's control. And the people over there, they said that's by African militia militia, Gaddafi's
Okay, well, I
militias.
appreciate you making that point. It is also worth saying at least one of the units, the Libyan army units based in Benghazi, is known to have gone across to the opposition side, but we can't possibly say with any certainty whether the Libyan army has or hasn't fired on protesters at some point. Now, let's pause for a moment. Safwan, Sundes and Professor Mendes, thank you for your contributions. Also, thanks to those of you watching. Keep them coming online. We're not stopping. We're just pausing for a couple of minutes here on World Have Your Say. We're doing two things on World Have Your Say on BBC World News. First and foremost, of course, we're telling you all of the latest from Libya, but we're also discussing how the watching world should react. There are crucial meetings for the UN's Human Rights Council in Geneva today. NATO is also meeting with France and Britain leading the way in calls for an arms embargo and sanctions against Libya. NATO's yet to sanction that move. And all of you watching BBC World News around the world, tell us how you feel the international community should respond to what's happening in Libya. All the contact details are on the screen throughout the discussion, and you're always welcome to take part. Now, for the moment, we've said goodbye to Professor Mendes in Washington, D.C. Safwan, who worked in the Libyan embassy in London until very recently when he resigned, is still with us. We're also joined by Saeed, a businessman in Dubai, and Suleiman, who's in London but has family in Benghazi, and Sundes in Manchester still with us as well. So a great many guests. And as you can imagine, getting people live on the television from Libya is incredibly difficult at the moment. That's why we're speaking to a number of Libyans outside of Libya. Sundes, let me ask you about your family back in Libya. Have you been able to speak to them, and what are their experiences?
Hello, it's Karen in the news current position. Have the lines been pulled?
Sundes, can you hear me?
Well,
No, it doesn't sound like she can. Well, Suleiman, you've got family in Benghazi. Let me ask you the same question. Have you been in touch with your family?
Yes, I have been in touch with them every day, actually, night and morning and night. I've been in touch with them during last week, every day, especially in the last, the first 4 days, which the situation was very bad. My two brothers, youngest brothers, 22 and 24 years, told me in the phone, I remember this moment very good. They told me, don't be sad if we died, because we will die to bring freedom to Libya. The situation now is very good situation in Benghazi. I mean, they celebrate. Today we saw the Friday prayer, which was great. We never saw that in Libya before. The morale in Libya is high, especially in Benghazi and the eastern part of Libya. We believe Gaddafi regime has maybe hours or just this one day to be kicked out from Tripoli. We trust, they have trust in God. Everything will be okay in just 1 or 2 days.
So they're feeling confident in Benghazi. Sundays in Manchester, I think you can hear us now. Tell us about how your family has fared over the past week.
Well, when we managed to contact them, they're fine. Like the brother was saying, the morale in Benghazi is very, very high at the moment. And what's amazing is the unity that has come about because of the revolution. You have to understand, 42 years being ruled by a dictator has really pushed the morale low. People didn't feel like they wanted to even make an effort for their country. But since this revolt, since the revolution, people are taken to the street, cleaning up the street for the first time. The first time a radio called Freedom Libya Radio has come out. This was unknown in the past. In a matter of days, a free newspaper has appeared in Benghazi. The youth are leading the way. There's, like he was saying, it's a totally different Benghazi. It's a totally different Libya. And we're hoping the same for Tripoli. Now, as for Tripoli, I have family in all areas, in Misrata, in Tripoli and Benghazi. I actually had a family member in Benghazi who was kidnapped and taken to the Katiba, the final Katiba, the barracks that was that fell. And he managed to escape, thankfully, hurt but alive.
Well, Sundes and Suleiman, in fact, all of you, I'm keen to discuss how your relatives in Libya want the outside world to react. But I should tell you that one resident of Tripoli, just speaking to the BBC, has said many people are being killed right now in Tripoli. I just got a phone call from friends who witnessed people going out of mosques being shot at. I know one of the people killed. I was speaking to a friend, her brother-in-law got killed. I could hear screams. This is happening in an area called Sawat al-Dalmani. Let's move from that account in Tripoli to the border between Libya and Tunisia, because we can speak to the journalist Zuhair Latif, who joins us on the phone. Zuhair, tell us about the scene where you are.
Yeah, I'm not far from the Tunisian border inside Libya.
And what kind of people are there, and what are they telling you?
Well, it's a little quite complicated position. In some area, it's really like the border is still controlled by Libyan authority. And if you go like 100 miles from the border, it's near Zawiya, it's controlled by people. It's not anymore controlled by Libyan authority in general. Thousands of workers try to get, I mean, especially Tunisians try to cross the border right now. Mm-hmm. And other foreign workers like Chinese and other nationality as well, they're trying to get the border from Libya to Tunisia.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Zuhair Latif, a freelance journalist speaking to us from the Libya-Tunisia border. I can see here that BBC Hindi is reporting that the Indian government is deploying 2 ships to take Indian nationals out of Libya. Let's go to Saeed in Dubai. Saeed, you're a businessman. I've just read one account coming into the BBC of yet more firing on civilians, a report that civilians are being shot at by supporters of Colonel Gaddafi. How should the world react to these reports?
Well, this is a very, very dangerous situation, and the world should help Libya by communicating and coordinating with Colonel Gaddafi and helping Colonel Gaddafi understand the situation. And probably there's nobody to explain him the situation. He needs international community's pressure and help to understand the situation, and that will help Libya and the Libyans to reduce their sufferings and reduce the deaths.
But you, Saeed, you talk about pressure. Let's bring in Safwan, for instance. You used to work at the Libyan embassy in London until recently. Safwan, it's all very well talking about pressure, but what kind of pressure when these kind of events may be happening in Tripoli at the moment? Do we need to talk about more than arms embargoes and sanctions or international justice and talk about military intervention?
All the pressure comes out of the people. People in Tripoli should make a move now. That we don't need Sipota, we don't need him out. We need other cities to contribute, such as Zawiya. Zawiya now, as I heard, at the phone call this morning, swept out of Gaddafi's control. But they can't move because some of his Sipota and his militia is still in the middle of the way. They can't keep them to move. And we need support from other cities as well, especially from the south, and big tribes as well, to move against him. This is the pressure against Gaddafi.
Well, that's interesting, and the idea of internal pressure rather than external pressure is one maybe we can explore on the second edition of World Have Your Say in a few minutes' time. Many thanks to Safwan Jamoum for the moment, and Sundez and Suleiman Saeed as well. We appreciate all of you taking part. Here's an anonymous Libyan who's emailed us from Tripoli saying, "We are fearful. My internet connection is faster than anything I've ever experienced before. I'm suspicious. We were not attacked from the air, but the terror we lived through on Sunday and Monday was imaginable." Do remember, wherever you're watching, you can get in touch. We'll be back on air in a couple of minutes' time for the second edition of World Have Your Say, trying to bring you the latest on what's happening in Libya, bearing in mind all the restrictions there are on getting decent information out of the country at the moment. And we'll also be discussing how the world should meet. The UN and NATO are holding crucial meetings at the moment. But do go online, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Leave us a comment and your contact details if you'd like to come on to the next edition of the programme. How should the watching world respond to what's happening in Libya? I'll speak to you in a moment. Hi everyone, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, just with every day this week, your attention remains on Libya. And over the next half an hour, we'll bring you all the latest developments as well as discussing how the watching world should react. Now, some of you are advocating military intervention. Is that something you would support? All the contact details for Facebook, Twitter, the blog, email, text and phone are scrolling along the bottom of the screen. And we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. Just looking through some of the emails and text messages you're sending in. Michael in Ghana says President Obama needs to be more robust. Jacob in the States on the same issue says we need to quit being the world's policeman. Let someone else handle it. And CD in Texas tweeted me just before I came into the studio to say the UN can deliberate all it wants, but it's time for action now. They need our help in Libya. Well, we're going to get into all of these issues in a couple of minutes. But before we discuss what the watching world to do, let's get up to date with what's been happening today in Libya, beginning in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, where there's reported to be fighting on either side of the city. This appears to be concentrated in the towns of Al-Zawiya to the west and Misrata to the east. Tripoli itself is being defended by Colonel Gaddafi's top military unit. The Reuters news agency is reporting that the eastern town of Brega is now under rebel control. Meanwhile, at an emergency session in Geneva, the UN's Human Rights Commissioner has said that the violence in Libya appears to be escalating and has urged the world to act without delay. Navi Pillay said the actions reportedly taken by Colonel Gaddafi could amount to crimes against humanity. And we'll talk about what form that action might take in a moment. At least 5 people have been killed in anti-government protests in Iraq as thousands of people took to the streets in demonstrations against corruption and against the poor state of the economy. The biggest demonstration was in Baghdad's main square. Elsewhere in Yemen, tens of thousands of supporters and opponents of President Ali Abdullah Saleh have held demonstrations in the capital, Sana'a. The past 9 days have seen 19 people die in a sustained wave of nationwide anti-government protests. The president has said he'll definitely stand down at the end of his term in 2013, but he said he won't give way to what he's calling anarchy and killing. And away from these protests in the Middle East and North Africa, John Galliano, British fashion designer, has been suspended by French couture brand Dior, pending an investigation about alleged anti-Semitic remarks he made outside a Paris cafe. Galliano was escorted home by French police after an altercation that ended with him hurling insults at a couple, according to a police source. Well, we have guests in Libya and outside of Libya. As you can imagine, it's very hard speaking to people live from Libya. So we have Libyans in London and Manchester joining us, as well as our correspondent Jim Muir, who's on the border between Tunisia and Libya. And Jim, we have Suleiman, who's Libyan but living in London. And Suleiman, you've got a question for Jim Muir.
Yes, I need to ask, is Libyan allowed to enter Libya from Tunisian border? Because we heard Libyans not allowed to enter from the Gaddafi military side. I need to make sure about this information.
So, Jim Muir, is there a flow of people in both directions on the border?
Certainly not a flow in both directions. No, the real flow is coming out. But I'm told that Libyans who want to go in, or people who have Libyan residency cards, can go in, at least as far as the Tunisian authorities are concerned. So there is, I think, a very small number of people going in the other direction, but nothing like the flow that is coming out. That is obviously the main direction that the traffic is taking, as it were.
Are there many Libyans come out from Libya?
Very few, to be honest. I mean, I've seen a few cars. I mean, most of the people coming across are on foot, and the bulk of them are either Tunisian or, actually, at the moment, mainly Egyptian workers. But I've seen a few cars, Libyan cars with Jamahiriya written on the number plate, coming out. Obviously, fairly well-to-do people in general, not low-level or low-paid workers like most of the Egyptians who are coming out. So very few Libyans, and there's certainly not evidence here on this side of the border of a huge exodus of Libyans themselves. It's mainly foreign workers at this stage. Now, whether that's because they're stopping Libyans from coming across from the Libyan side of the border, or because the people just don't want to come out, that is very hard to tell.
Suleiman, thank you for those questions. Let's bring in Sundes, a Libyan woman living in Manchester in the north of England. Sundes, what would you like to ask Jim Muir, our correspondent on the Libya-Tunisia border?
Well, we heard that there were Tunisians who have set up camps for those who are injured in Libya. Is that true?
Well, yes, but I have to say that very, very few have come across. I mean, they have set up medical facilities here at the border. There's tents with lots of medical personnel standing by, volunteers from local towns and so on. It's very heartwarming. But as far as I'm aware, they've only had a very, very few customers. I mean, a few days ago, there were 3 very slightly wounded people came, or hurt people came across. But other than that, they've basically been standing around waiting and hoping to be able to help. But there hasn't been a flow of wounded people coming across the border. There are obviously medical needs deeper inside Libya. We've seen, scenes from the hospitals there, and they're obviously in need of things in places like Benghazi and presumably also Zawiya, which is not so far away from here, where there's been heavy fighting. But they're well away from the border, and there's no access and no contact and no real knowledge of what they need and how to get it to them.
So they're not able to pass blood donations or medical supplies into Libya?
That's the case at the moment on this border. For example, this morning there was a big convoy came down from the north of Tunisia, basically Islamic activists who came down. They came down very organized with trucks, big trucks full of medical equipment and medicines and food and so on, emergency materials, which they wanted to see taken across the border, but they were actually prevented from dropping them off right on the Tunisian side. The Tunisian army actually, according to them, said they couldn't do that. So they've retreated for the moment to a little bit further up the road. But I'm sure they won't be far away, and they'll be trying desperately to get this aid through.
Hopefully.
Many thanks for answering those questions, Jim. That's Jim Muir on the Tunisia-Libya border. Sundes and Suleiman, thank you very much indeed for asking the questions as well. I can see that NATO ambassadors in Brussels should be starting their emergency meeting on Libya around now. As we get news out of that meeting, of course, we'll bring it to you here on the BBC World Service. And as Jim leaves the screen, we'll bring in Khan Ross, a former British diplomat at the UN, in the next couple of minutes. But while we're doing that, Sundes, let me ask you the most pressing question really amongst our viewers, which is whether military action is appropriate. We know that you've got family in Tripoli and elsewhere in Libya. When you hear these rumours and some confirmed reports of civilians being shot,
yes,
what do you want the outside world to do?
I mean, I've already said about world condemnation and world leaders speaking.
But you've already got that, Sundes. What more do you want? Do you want military action?
No outside military action. The Libyans managed to topple the East on their own, and the West can do so as well. What we call for is for the Libyans in Libya to start coming out from all the cities, preferably the south now, like one of my brothers was saying, and to start heading towards Tripoli to help the Tripolitanians. But for military action outside, that's definitely a no-no. From history, it's proven that once they come in, they don't ever go out.
Thank you very much indeed for those comments. I know so far we've had calls from the Netherlands, the US, Nigeria, Senegal, and also from Libya. Not having any luck getting that Libyan line up, though, but please do keep calling. I can see that Marah in Malaysia has said Gaddafi needs to step down. The people should decide what has to be done for their country. And let's also pull up on the screen here a message from Skidmore in the US. He's got in touch at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay to say the US is damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. As an American, I say let them have the pride of doing this for themselves. The time to act is when we are asked for help. Suleiman, do you agree with that?
Yes, I actually agree with the Sundes. We don't need military action from outside, especially from West. This would be a biggest mistake West can do. What we need short statement says that EU and UN doesn't consider Mr. Gaddafi as a president of Libya. That's it. We need this is a short statement, and this will give the confidence for Libyan, because we are suspicious now about the West action. We all of us, especially in Libya, we know West are caring about oil, not about our human rights or about rights. They care about the oil, and if West needs to intervene, he should intervene last week, not now, after we liberate 90% of Libya. Gaddafi control just 30 kilometers. And what we need, short statement said, we don't recognize Mr. Gaddafi as president.
So
Libyan
that is
president.
interesting, and you're not the first Libyan to say that to us, saying we don't want military action, but we do want governments to say we no longer recognize Colonel Gaddafi as the leader of Libya. Wherever you're watching BBC World News, do you think that's an appropriate response? Do get in touch through facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay, or you can tweet us at BBC_WHYS. I'm just seeing that Anita, a South African in Canada, is watching. She says the African Union needs to stand up and do something. They should send peacekeeping forces, and we'll talk about that international response a little bit more with Khan Ross in Washington, D.C. But before we do that, the BBC has a Libya desk where colleagues of mine spend most hours of the day following what's happening on social media, calling people in Libya and elsewhere in the region to find out as best they can what's happening. Let's speak to Pascal Harter, who's working on that desk today. Pascal, what have you seen in the past couple of hours?
Well, a lot. We have reports coming in, and in fact what's very interesting is that today, unlike the last few days, we've really been able to get hold of people in Tripoli. The phone lines are working a lot better, and I wondered what the possible reason for that could be, whether Colonel Gaddafi had perhaps lost some control over the state-operated mobile networks. But let me give you the latest information that has just come in now, which is one witness who says Tripoli is a war zone now between peaceful protesters and Colonel Gaddafi's thugs using live ammunition. He says many, many dead. Now, we're not able to verify this because we're not there on the ground, but this is the most extreme of the eyewitness accounts that we have had. I should say that Libyan state TV has issued a statement saying it's not true, Tripoli is calm, there are no people who have been killed, but we are getting so many eyewitness accounts. Take this one, for example. We're not naming these people for their own safety, but this woman who we've spoken to on the phone from Tripoli, she said many people are being killed right now in the city. I just got a phone call from a friend who witnessed people coming out of mosques and being shot at. I know one of the people who's been killed. I was speaking to a friend. Her brother-in-law got killed. I could hear the screams on the phone. Just quickly, though, to give a little bit of information to Sundes, I wondered, she was talking about how undesirable military intervention from outside would be. But Salah, one of our witnesses, told us protesters are unarmed in Tripoli. They need help.
Thank you very much indeed, Pascal. That's Pascal Harter on our Libya desk. I can see on Twitter there's talk of splits between the Libyan security forces still loyal to Colonel Gaddafi. The Libyan youth movement, Shabab Libya, tweets breaking reports of a split between members of the Khamis Brigade, the elite unit commanded by one of Colonel Gaddafi's sons. When confirmed, this could signal the end of the tyrant. That, as Pascal was saying with regards to other tweets, is unconfirmed. But we'll bring you any news we get, of course, here on BBC World News. Well, to all of you watching and contributing, thanks very much for taking part. We're going to take a break for a couple of minutes, and then we'll carry on our conversation. Hi there, thanks very much indeed for tuning to World Have Your Say. We're discussing what the world should do about the situation in Libya. In the past few minutes, we've had calls from Venezuela, Italy, Bahrain, Dubai, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Malta, South Africa, Bangladesh and Finland, not to mention some of you in Libya calling us up. We're trying to call you back when you give us your numbers. At the moment, we're not getting through. As soon as we manage to get through to you, of course, we'll put you on the air. The phone number is scrolling along the bottom of the screen as well. OK, let's look at the issue which I think is coming up more than any other amongst your messages, which is the issue of military intervention. And we can talk about this with Safwan, who was working at the Libyan embassy in London until he resigned. We also still have Suleiman, who's a Libyan in London, whose family live in Benghazi. And Khan Ross is also joining us from the UN studio in New York. He's a former British diplomat at the UN, now runs an organisation called Independent Diplomat, which offers diplomatic advice. Khan, let me start with you. Suleiman, Safwan, feel free to respond. Khan, do you think military action should now be considered?
I don't think it is being considered. I don't think it's on the table amongst member states at the UN. I think it's highly unlikely. The UN Security Council is going to meet this afternoon informally. The word here is of a draft resolution prepared by France and the UK, which will include various measures, including things like an asset freeze on members of the regime, an arms embargo, and possibly a referral for crimes against humanity to the International Criminal Court. But this is only the beginning of a discussion. Whether a resolution of this kind will get past the well-known reservations of people like China and Russia is not yet clear, and I suspect this will be debated here for at least a day or two before being adopted. Such a resolution contains nothing about military intervention, and I don't see that that's on the table right now.
I'm really quite confident. By the time they finish their meetings and they decide, Gaddafi will be gone by our people, by the Libyans. I just want to raise a very crucial point. We need the international community and international criminal law to accuse, or to bring all the African presidents who have provided arms, army, everything to Gaddafi to kill our people.
I totally agree with Safwan. By 1 day or 2 days, Gaddafi will fall down. Even what we need now from international community, just announcement about the criminal Gaddafi he did, the crimes Gaddafi did last week, about the inner cycle of Gaddafi, freezing the assets and the money about Gaddafi and his sons outside, the families, and try to not give any credibility about any Libyan official from Gaddafi's side.
Yeah, on top of that, we need all the African presidents, the African leaders who helped Gaddafi to kill our people, to kill Libyans.
I just received information from Libya that Mr. Idris Deby, the president of Chad,
yeah,
sent 1,500 militias to Libya just to kill Libyans, and Gaddafi paid for him $100 million. Well, that's a criminal.
Suleiman, it's worth saying that we're not able to confirm those reports. But I mean, Khan Ross, talk to us about, we're talking about the African Union, we've already talked about the UN and NATO. Of course, Russia and China operate as individual, very powerful states. Is one of the problems here, there are so many different bodies, organisations and individual countries, it's difficult to come to a decision.
I don't think that's a problem. I think my own concern is that there's been a lack of urgency, certainly here at the UN. I mean, the violence in Libya has been going on for several days. It started last week. It didn't happen until Tuesday for the Security Council to issue its first statement. It's now Friday, perhaps a week after the violence began, and only now we're looking at a draft resolution. I think things could have happened a lot faster. When NATO bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, the Chinese here made the UN Security Council meet at 2 o'clock in the morning the very same day to demand action. When the UN wants to, it can act very quickly when there's a unity of purpose and a real sense of urgency. And I'm disappointed that it's taken so long in this case for it even to consider substantive action.
Suleiman, are you disappointed?
No, yes, I'm totally disappointed about UN and EU actions toward Libya, because we still feel we don't West don't treat us as a human being. They treat us as owner of oils, and they try after about the oil, not about us. What we need now, we need a short statement and a clear statement. What West need to decide about us. That he need just oil, well, that he need just a peaceful solution about this. Is West able to deal with Gaddafi anymore after that?
And I think, Suleiman, you're saying you want a clear statement. We are anticipating some form of statement from both the UN and from NATO today. So do keep watching the BBC or any other news outlet for that matter, because the news will be everywhere if those statements come out. Thank you very much to you, Suleiman. Thanks also to Khan Ross from the organisation Independent Diplomat, and to Safwan Jamoun. We appreciate your contributions and all of you watching as well. We'll carry on the conversation on BBC Radio in 2 hours' time. Goodbye.
نشرة